without limits or judgment. A place for you and people like you to tell your most effed up stories. Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Effed Up Stories. I'm your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we will be talking to someone who has had one of the most famous and terrifying near-death experiences. An experience that has brought him to hell and back. Of course, the guest I'm referring to is Howard Storm, and you may have already heard his story on the television show Unsolved Mysteries. That's where I initially saw it. Or you may have heard him on Coast to Coast AM or a multitude of other TV shows or radio shows. But as is the Effed Up Stories way, we will be looking for details we can't find anywhere else. Now, before we start, for any of you out there who have had your own effed up stories, pictures, or videos on the paranormal, UFOs, or conspiracies, you can send them to me at will@effedupstories.com.
Or Ryan at effedupstories.com.
For a chance to get your submission on our website and or our podcast. And remember to check the official website at www.effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com for all of our non-podcast content. In fact, there were quite a few stories there put up lately, so be sure to go and check those out. Now, with that said, let us begin the journey into hell with Howard Storm. Hello, Howard, and thank you so much for coming on to our show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I've been very touched by your story from way back when I first saw it on Unsolved Mysteries, and it really resonated with me personally for a number of reasons. But I've always felt that it had a very strong message for anyone out there who may have dabbled into things or lost their way, we'll say. And, a message of hope is how I would describe it. And, well, you're welcome. I mean, it really helped me, and I'm hoping for our listeners out there, for any of you that have also, found your way into a dark place, I'm hoping that Howard's story, which we will explore tonight, will also help you. So what I'd like to do, Howard, is to start right from the beginning. So let's go back to when you were a child, long before you ever had this near-death experience. Were you religious at that point, and how was your upbringing?
Well, my father served in World War II, and when he came back, I was from the Pacific. I was conceived, and this was a time when America was going through tremendous prosperity. We were middle-class people, but aspiring to the American dream, and part of that dream was of tremendous conformity, and the culture was that everybody went to church on Sunday, whether they sort of really truly believed it or not, and I think it's another matter. But anyways, it was huge church attendance. We all went to church in our Sunday finest, and I did not enjoy the Sunday worship service because my memory of those was getting slapped a lot for fidgeting, but I enjoyed Sunday school, and I took the lessons of Sunday school to heart. And then when I became young teenager, 15, I came to believe that it was all a lot of hypocrisy that, for reasons that should be fairly obvious, so I don't need to go into them, that what they taught in church and what people actually practiced and believed were two different things. There was a tremendous amount of bigotry and hatred for people of opposing political views and that sort of thing that was very freely expressed. Tremendous racism. That was like one of the big issues when I was growing up, was the civil rights struggle in the United States. And so I came to believe that the church was all show, but it was completely dishonest. And that complete distrust of the church led me to leave
So basically, the things that you got to experience, outside of church, gave you a completely different perspective on, what you initially believed the church to be and what it represented.
Yes. We said all these beautiful things in the church, love one another and all about being good, but I didn't see in reality that being put in practice either in our home or in the nation of the United States. People were being literally lynched and murdered for trying to get their civil rights in the South. And lots of bad stuff going on in the northern part of the United States too, but not quite so
certainly
obvious. Anyways, so when I went to college when I was 17 years old and had a philosophy class, and the teacher was an atheist, and he pretty much confirmed where I was going in my young philosophical worldview, that the only truth was science, and that religion was, as Marx said, the opiate for the masses, and that the Bible was just a lot of myths and superstitions and completely irrelevant. So I left the church and I thought of myself as an existentialist and all that sort of thing. And then eventually I went on to California, went to college out there, went to the University of California, Berkeley, and was politically very radical and all that sort of thing.
So with the other, people that you worked with, because you were an art teacher.
Yes.
Right. So you worked with other teachers and stuff like that. Was this a common, I guess, a common belief system amongst the people that you worked with as well?
Well, absolutely. I was a university professor, art teacher, starting in 1972, and there were some Christians on campus, but they'd stay pretty well hidden because the majority of people were not Christians and held Christianity in contempt, and we were quite open about our scorn for Christianity.
That seems a lot like today in a lot of ways. It's people are almost afraid to say, if they're religious, because they're often mocked and so they keep it to themselves or lay low. Is almost as if it's not cool to.
Well, the stigma these days seems to be that those who practice religion are superstitious and backward, somehow, less intelligent or less evolved than the rest of the world.
And it's really.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, it really does have an impact on the large majority of like people who might be open to certain things, just because of the, again, like you said, the stigma that's attached to it. They might avoid it just to not be singled out, or made fun of, or something like that. So at this point, I mean, you're a successful art professor, and I mean, I believe it was on a field trip to Europe in 1985 that that's where you initially had your experience.
That's correct.
So can we jump up there and just start from there? So you're on your field trip.
Yes, this is a 3-week trip around Europe with a group of students and my wife, and it was the next to last day of the trip, in fact, and we were in Paris, and at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning, June 1st, 1985, I had a perforation of the small stomach. Now, I had had some nausea and stomach upset for days before, but I didn't think anything of it. And then at 11 o'clock in the morning, I just went to the ground in our hotel room, screaming and kicking and terrified because I had the most acute pain I had ever experienced in my life occurring inside me in the middle of my abdomen.
I believe one place I read that you said that initially you thought you had been shot. Is that correct?
Yeah, that I was convinced I was shot because the pain was right in the middle of me inside, and so the only thing I think of was to have been shot. But I also realized I hadn't heard any sound, and when I looked around the room, there was my wife and one of my students, and the windows of the room weren't broken, so I couldn't figure out where it came from.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Oh, that's it. It was terrifying because I didn't know what was happening. So, anyways, my wife called the desk of the hotel, and they called an emergency medical service, and a doctor came pretty quickly to the hotel, and he got me off the floor with some great effort because I was pretty immobilized by the pain, and he examined me on the bed, and he came to the conclusion that I had this perforation of the duodenum and that I needed to go to the hospital right away. He made it quite clear to me that this was a medical emergency and I was going to be having surgery within the hour. So I called an ambulance, and I was taken to about 8 miles away to a public hospital, to an emergency room, examined and x-rayed there, gave my medical history, and then they sent me off to a surgical hospital. And they all assured me that the situation was critical and that I would have the surgery in a matter of minutes. Unfortunately, when I got to the surgical hospital, because it was a Saturday, there was no surgeon on duty available at that time. And so they put me in a room to await having surgery. And I laid in that room for 10 hours before I ever saw a doctor.
Yes, and I remember, well, actually, it was in the episode on Unsolved Mysteries. And I mean, after the first 2 hours, I mean, you were you were getting certain that you weren't going to make it, and then 4 hours passed, and then you were more certain. And by the 10th hour, because you were told it had to be done within the hour. Which, and by the way, it amazes me that they couldn't get a doctor in, and it's scary to think that you could be in such dire straits and not be able to get help. But I believe it was at the 10th hour. I mean, you were certain that you were going to die, and,
yes.
you said your goodbyes to your wife. And I mean, so at this point, is it fair to say that, I mean, you were an atheist?
Oh, yeah, very much so.
So
the doctors in the United States told me that my life expectancy was 5 hours. So the situation that I was in was, without any doubt, beyond critical into fatal. And nurse came in and said that they were unable to find a doctor, and they'd try and find one the next day, which would be Sunday. And with that, I knew that it was time for me to stop struggling to stay alive because it was very, very difficult to breathe and to stay alive. And I knew that the simplest thing would be to just stop struggling, and then I would fade into non-existence. I knew non-existence meant, the big black curtain, the end, finished, it's over,
Yeah.
There's I knew there wasn't anything beyond it because we are scientific truth. We're just an electrochemical organism with this delusion that we have some purpose and meaning in life, which, of course, from a scientific point of view, true is absolutely not true. We have no purpose and meaning whatsoever. It's a completely random universe.
But of course,
when our existence is over, it's over.
And of course, you got a very big shock to find out that there was much more after the curtains closed. So
I went unconscious and then awoke from that unconsciousness. I found myself standing next to the bed. I did not have the pain in my stomach anymore, and as I became more aware of my situation, I was amazed to find that I was more alive than I'd ever been in my life, which meant that my senses were greatly heightened. And I tried to communicate with my wife and with the roommate that I had in the room, who a very nice Frenchman, and they, from my perspective, were ignoring me. From their perspective, I was not standing in the room yelling and screaming at them. They didn't see me at all doing that. All they were aware of was the not breathing cadaver bed, which was the former me.
So were they aware? Oh, sorry.
What?
I was just going to ask, were they aware at that point that, that you were dead? Like, were they, alarmed or, thinking to rush to get a doctor, or was it just that, how do I put it, that you were unconscious, or like, did they show signs
I think they were thinking more that I was unconscious.
Okay. So now you saw your body.
But I was getting there was no doctor, no nurse. There was nobody to determine whether I had a pulse or was breathing or not, It's just,
okay. But you did see your body in the bed, and you noticed that it looked remarkably like yourself. I was curious, did any of these things like raise any alarms to you, or was it just, the pain is gone, I feel good about that. And of course you were hearing voices in the hallway call out to you.
But back to my alarm was that it didn't make sense to me. How could there possibly be my body in the bed when I was standing in the room looking at it? That's not possible.
Yeah.
And so the thing that I was most concerned about was, how come things are happening that can't happen? Am I losing my mind? Have I gone crazy? Why are these people? Why is my wife and my roommate not responding to me? And those things it made me very angry because it was madness. It didn't make any sense.
No.
In terms of speculating about life after death or anything, no, not at all.
So,
that's not possible. That would just be more madness. From
exactly.
my perspective,
Yeah. So, at this point, you're really not sure what's going on, and as you said, that's not something that you believed in. So, you have these strange things going on. Like your wife and your roommate seem to not be aware that you're there. Did you notice anything particularly different about the room in terms of visuals or sound or any perceptual differences?
Well, like I said, my senses were very heightened, so I was very, very aware of the room, which previously I'd been lying in a bed, pretty much just doubled up in pain. So the room wasn't something I had been that aware of for the 10 hours prior to that. But now that I, like, for example, I could smell all the odors of the room, it smelled a lot like stale urine. And I was very aware of the very old waxed linoleum on the floor, and also the room was lit by fluorescent lights, and it was very, very bright.
Okay.
I heard people calling me by name outside the room, but they didn't come into the room. They stayed way out in the hallway. And so I went over to the doorway of the room and said, "Who are you?" And they said, "We've come to take you. It's time for you to go." And I said, "Well, I'm sick and I need an operation and I'm waiting for the doctor." And they said, "We know all about you. We've been waiting for you. You need to hurry up because we've got to go." So they didn't say it, but I interpret that as meaning that they were from the doctor to take me to surgery.
Yes.
And so,
And were they dressed in like nurses' outfits, or did they look like they belonged?
they stayed. The hallway was very gray. It was neither light nor dark. It was just very gray, and they stayed back in that grayness. And they appeared to be dressed in drab, plain clothing, not unlike what the other people in the hospital wore.
Now,
so it was similar.
Now, something that I noted that was interesting to me, I read an article that you did with Rory Fitzgerald, and you mentioned that once you stepped out into the hallway, and again you explained it was very dim and gray and fuzzy, like a bad black and white television picture.
Yeah.
Now, and so I guess the people themselves also had this drab color, like even like their skin and stuff like that.
Yeah, it all seemed very colorless, and it was very unsettling.
Now, you said that once you stepped into the hallway, and it was quoted in the article that it felt, that once you stepped through the portal, it was very, very clear to you that you could never go back. And
yeah, in this whole experience, and there's hundreds, thousands of things I can't explain. And I knew that once I went through that, when I went through that doorway, there was this huge, uh-oh feeling. So I knew I couldn't go. There was a one-way doorway. The doorway was open, but I knew that I couldn't go back into the light. And once I left that light, I was now with these people.
Now, were you aware of that before you stepped out of it, or was it just...
No,
okay.
I never. If I had known that, I never would have gone through the doorway.
Okay, because one of the things I wondered, and I mean, this is just speculation, and just see what you think of it. It reminds me of people who die and who become ghosts, and they haunt a specific location, and they never want to leave. It's like they're chained to it, and it makes me wonder if they're aware that there's this threshold that once they cross that threshold, they have to go and deal with whatever awaits them, and perhaps they're afraid, and they don't go. So that's the kind of thing that it made me think of. The other thing I wanted to ask you is, so the people in the hallway that were calling to you, would you say that they were all moving in one direction?
Oh yeah, they. When I went out into the hallway, they encircled me and started to sort of herd me in one direction, and that went on for a very long time.
Now, do you remember, in perspective, if you just walked outside the door, do you remember if that direction was left or right?
Yeah, actually, it's funny you should mention. Yeah, we went to the right.
Okay, that's interesting.
I don't know what significance that is, but we did. That definitely went to the right.
Well, I just asked. Well, I look for symbolism, and I know that they often they say the left-hand path for the bad side, and the right-hand path for the good side. So I was just curious. Curious kind of thing. So
it depends on which side of the doorway you're on, which is right and which is left.
True, I guess.
From inside the room, it was to the right, and outside the room would be the left. Yeah.
I guess perspective is everything.
Yeah.
So, you step out in this hallway. You know that you can't go back. Once you get out there, I mean, were you hit with like a a really ominous feeling, or were you still like under the impression that they found you a surgeon and that kind of thing? Like, what kind of alarm bells or features were sticking out to you and kind of?
Yeah. Well, I was clinging to the hope that they were in fact hospital personnel to walk me to my surgery, and having gone through 10 hours of absolute misery without any painkillers or any medication whatsoever. I was like, I'm feeling so much better. I mean, it's got to be good now because I'm getting better.
Yeah.
The pain is gone, and these people are here, and they say they understand, and off we go to.
So at first, would you say that their intentions almost seemed good, like they were they were there to help and or do you know what I mean? Like, did it?
Oh no, I don't. I wouldn't attribute anything positive to them. They were lying to me. Yeah, they knew all about me, and they were there to take me, but they weren't taking me to surgery.
Oh no,
they
certainly.
were taking me. Yeah.
But I mean, initially when you first stepped out, so you're kind of you're swimming in all this information coming at you from every which angle. At first, I mean, so like you said, you thought that they were taking you, hopefully to a surgeon or something like that, and they know these things, like you said that, how could they possibly know? At first, did you initially think that their intentions were good, or was it an immediate?
Oh yes.
Okay.
No. And as we walked along, I kept asking them questions, and of course, their responses to the questions went from evasive to just plain out completely rude. So I mean, at first you'd say, "Well, who's the surgeon, and how far is it to go there, and who are you people?" And those kind of questions, and which they'd say, "You'll find out. You'll know when you get there." Stuff like that, and then. As time went on, and I kept asking, the same sort of questions over again, their responses were like, "Shut up, don't talk,"
So they were getting
they were getting very nasty. Yeah.
Now, did you know?
So when they started getting nasty, I started to get pretty afraid. The problem is that more and more people were joining our group. So now instead of there being like 8 or 12 of them, now there were many, many more of them. The group kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I was now in a mob of people in the center of it. And the thing that got really scary was people would start saying things that were quite unpleasant. And other people would tell them to be quiet, that I could hear them. And they didn't want, and they would say things like, "We don't want to scare them off."
Oh, okay. So were they, personal things that only, that you wouldn't expect anyone to know, or was it just, in general, nasty things?
Personal, vulgar remarks.
Okay. Now, did you notice any distinctive features? Like, I mean, once you're out in the hallway and you're very close to these people, was there any distinctive visual features that said to you that there's something wrong, there's something not normal about these people?
Yes, they were all adult men and women. There were no children, and I was surprised at how bland they all were.
Okay.
They appeared, from what I could tell, to be so lacking in any sort of kind of specific features. And it was sort of interesting, and I think that that wasn't their true character, but somehow they were masking themselves because.
Like the whole thing was a trap that they had set up to lure you into.
Right.
Okay. So now I remember, as you told the story of walking down this hallway, that it was an incredibly long walk. Can you, and I know this is hard because I guess your concept of time is completely different when you're on the other side, but if you had to estimate, I mean, how long would you say that you were walking down this hallway?
Many days.
Wow.
One thing that I became very aware of, even during the walk, was as a teacher, you have to be very time conscious, and I had been a teacher for quite a while, so I had a very good sense of time. You know how long to run the class and when to start wrapping it up and come to your conclusion. End the class. In university, you don't have bells like you do in public school.
Yeah.
You just have to. Students are watching the time carefully, but as a teacher, you just have to develop an intuitive sense.
Certainly.
Of time. And so I had a good sense of time. Matter of fact, I had a remarkably good sense of time. Any time of the day. In those days, I never wore a watch, and I didn't need to, because if you had asked me what time it was, I could tell you. I would say, "Oh, it's about 10 after 2," and it would be 10 after 2. And people say, "How do you do that?" And I said, "I don't know. I just know." And so in this journey, one of the things that I became aware of, this time is not right, because I couldn't be doing this. Yeah. I'm really sick. How can I be walking this long? And the other thing, I never felt the least bit fatigued. And why do I have so much energy when a little while ago I couldn't even lift my head?
Certainly. And I mean, from the perspective of walking this through this hallway for days, I mean, already, I know that personally, if it had been me, I'd be wondering, how is it possible that there's a hallway this long? Oh
yeah, and that was the other thing about the hallway, was that as I moved through it, I became aware that the hallway, in fact, didn't have any features at all. There were no walls, no ceiling, no stairs. It was just, we were just in space.
That's interesting.
Every once in a while, I would, instead of doing what they wanted me to do, was just stay in the middle of a group and follow onward, I would, veer left to right a little bit.
Yep.
Just to kind of see if I could find some feature to this space. And they didn't like that at all. And
it's like they knew that.
I was trying to do a little exploring, and when I would do that, they'd get agitated, but there was nothing. I never found anything, just more space.
Wow, that's actually interesting. I never. I'm glad I got to ask that, because I never came across that detail.
So, Howard, do you feel that you were actually traversing a physical space? I mean, now obviously we're talking, other dimensional kind of a arena, but do you feel like perhaps they've created an illusion and they wanted you to stick to the illusion kind of a thing, but you were actually, I guess, spirit as physically as you can as a spirit, but physically moving through some space, which is why you had to spend those days and days walking?
Yes, I think you said it in the very early part of what you just said. That I think what had happened was, when I went unconscious, I left the vibrational state of this physical universe and moved into another dimension, but I was still in the physical universe as we know it, and what they were doing was they were moving me out of it into a completely different dimension of space. Scientists believe that there's multi dimensions all existing simultaneously.
I actually subscribe to that myself. It's interesting. Sorry, I was just going to say that it's interesting when you mention, a vibrational frequency, because, I often compare that to, say, a sound wave, which, as you know, is a frequency wave. You can't see it, but just by tuning the dial on the radio, you can tune into it. So just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
And as an artist, I'm very aware of the visible light spectrum, but the visible light spectrum on the total electromagnetic spectrum of wavelengths is just a little tiny fraction of all the activity that's taking place all the time that we are oblivious to.
Certainly. Like in ultraviolet and infrared spectrums and stuff like that. So yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. So you're walking down this hallway. I mean, for what feels like days, and I distinctly remember that you said, in one of the articles or videos I watched, that it was getting darker. Subtly was getting
Yes.
darker. Now, at the end of it, when they finally, I guess, reached their destination, I mean, it's pitch black at this point, I believe, right? And you're totally encircled by these things. I don't even know if I'd call them people at this point. Were you able to? I mean, was there any light source at all that you could make out any features, or were they completely indistinguishable?
No, I could see nothing. And I do want to make a slight correction. We weren't at the destination, because what happened was, when we got to that utter darkness, I said, I'm not going any further. And they said, you're almost there. And I said, and that's when I refused to move any further, and that's when they started to, when the fighting began. So I never got to the destination, whatever that would have been.
Well, wow, well, one has to wonder what exactly the destination was.
Yeah.
So
I don't speculate on that. I don't want to know.
No, certainly not. I mean, I can truly understand why that would be. So I mean,
well, Howard, do you equate the dimness, the ever growing gloom, with a kind of a descent, I guess? Like, do you feel like you were descending into a lower plane, or a lower vibrational region?
Yeah, I think that you said it quite well. I believe that the world as we know it, the physical universe as we know it, is a giant artifice made by the supreme being, the Almighty, the Creator, God, whatever you like to refer to, the prime mover of the universe. And so it's a construct. And in this construct, we're given this experience of life as an opportunity to grow and to make choices, and ultimately those choices are going to culminate in our destiny after we leave this. Because I very much believe that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, and that when we die in the physical universe, we continue to exist in another universe, if you will. And if we have liked the life experience that we've been given and have responded to it appropriately in a loving way, then we go on to higher levels of being and consciousness, and greater beauty and joy and hope, and etc. And if we reject the gift of life that we've been given, then we go to a place where the artifice and all that entails is no longer applicable. So in this place, all the things that we take for granted, like light and air and water and food and friendship and fun and laughter and all those things simply aren't. And
so,
what we're reduced to is just our sort of bestial instincts, which aren't very pretty.
A case of, you really reap what you sow, I guess.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, and I've often wondered this too. in terms of life, what while we're here, and it's like we're learning. It's like we're supposed to learn I guess really, I mean, it's how to love, it's how to interact with people, or what have you. The normal, natural things that we have. I mean, does it seem like maybe you take your life, you learn these things so that when you move on, and you do it again in your next life. If you pass the test, you move on and then you do it again. It almost seems like you're constantly refining your spiritual self.
Right.
To
Exactly.
meet this. I guess what's expected at the grand plan. The grand meaning of everything. So it's interesting to actually to hear you say it. Because I know, particularly in religion, they often have pretty strict ways of looking at things, and I'm not sure if I had heard it that way. I'm a Catholic, so I'm not sure if I heard it put that way. It was always kind of the belief that once you die, provided that you lived a good life, you go to heaven, and that's the end. But I wonder if like you said, we don't continue to go through these lives, refining ourselves further and further. To what end, I'm not sure, but that's what it almost seems like.
Well, the what we move on to, if we've successfully passed the test of life, so to speak, is we move on to more joy, more love, more powers, more beauty, more truth, more knowledge. I mean, lots and lots of good things. I mean, if you like music, wait until the next life, because it's going to get better.
I'd certainly be looking forward to that, being a huge music fan myself.
Yeah.
So I think when we left off, we were
at the end of the
at the darkness, at the edge of the darkness here. So
so when I refused to go with them any further, they started to push and pull at me, and I fought back to defend myself as much as I could, but it was really completely futile, because there were many, many of them and one of me, and so they did what they wanted, and what they wanted to do was they wanted to exert their dominance over me. They wanted to inflict pain in me, and they wanted to humiliate me. And they are very good at that, because basically that's all they do to one another, all the time. So they know how to do that sort of thing.
So I mean, they were completely torturing you, in every which way. I mean, how long, if you had to estimate, did this go on for?
I don't know, because it was so emotionally overwhelming. But I mean, it was quite a while. I mean, like, I would say definitely hours.
Okay,
and finally, I couldn't resist anymore, and I was all ripped up and torn apart and everything. So I was just lying there in a heap, just in agony. But the worst agony was the emotional, even much worse than the physical, because what they'd done had taken me right down to nothing.
So was this verbal? The way that they affected you emotionally, like, was it your, just things that they said, or was it like of a more personal, like they knew things maybe that you felt guilty about, or, those kinds of things?
No, it was what they were doing to me physically.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, at some point during this, I don't know what I'd call it. I mean, it is absolutely terrible. You're lying there, and you hear a voice say, "Pray to God."
Right.
And
It was completely startling because I didn't pray, and I didn't believe in God, and I hadn't prayed in my adult life. Last time I prayed was like when I was 15 years old, and now I was 38 years old, so it's been a long time. And I thought to myself, I don't pray. And the voice said, pray to God, and then I thought, I don't even know how to pray. And the voice said, pray to God, and I thought, when I was a kid, I used to know prayers. And what were those prayers?
Yeah.
So I was trying to remember something that I had memorized when I was a child, going to church. And I couldn't remember anything but little bits and pieces, little phrases. And it was all mixed up with everything I'd ever memorized in my life. So it was all confused, jumbled of little memorized phrases. But as I was trying to remember them, I did not intend to speak any of this aloud, but in trying to remember it, I started to mutter some things, and with that, the people around me became extremely agitated. And they were saying to me that there was no God, nobody could hear me, and that they were going to do much worse things to me than what they had already done if I didn't stop immediately. And they were saying this in very, very obscene language, which I won't repeat. And
okay.
because it agitated them so much, it finally gave me the sense of an opportunity to get back at them because they hated it so much. I tried to speak phrases that had God in them. So I'd say things like, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Just, God bless America, land that I love. Anything that had God in it. And they kept retreating away from me because they found my pitiful little prayers to be unbearable. And eventually I realized that they had retreated so far back in the darkness that I couldn't sense them at all. They were that far away from me. I couldn't hear them. No sense that they were. But I knew that they were out there. Just they were far away. So I lay there in that state for a very long period of time, thinking about what had happened to me. And what I came to the conclusion is that I had not been a very good son. I had not been a good brother. I had not been a good husband. I had not been a good father. I had not been a particularly good artist. My life was just a complete failure in every respect, and that because I had led a failed life, that I was garbage, and I had gone down the toilet of the universe into the cesspool, and now I was in the cesspool with all the other garbage people.
So,
and
sorry.
That was my fate. No, that's it.
So when you were down there, did you have, the feeling that you deserved this?
Yes, very much so. That was the really, really hard part of it. Was I felt that this was my just faith for the way that I had lived my life.
And
I had lived my life not literally, but figuratively, fighting for my supremacy, for my pleasure, and for my deluded self of superiority over other people. Always trying to assert my ego.
Yeah,
to be better than other people.
And the interest.
That's how these people lived, and that's how they existed in this darkness.
And the interesting thing about that, now I've read a few negative near-death experiences, and these people too have said that they felt like they deserved to be there. And the thing that strikes me is that what is it about being on the other side that gives you this perspective that we don't seem to have when on the living side? Like, we don't think of these things, we don't, it's like we don't see it. But for some reason, when people cross over, it's like all of a sudden they're very aware of the things that they've done and of who they are. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like, what?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of attractions and distractions in this world that we can keep deluding ourselves with. Like, we can have a failed relationships with our family, and then say, what I'll do, I'll buy a boat.
Yeah.
And I'll become a fisherman. And I'll go fishing on the weekends, and I'll enter a bass tournament, and I'll become a great bass fisherman. That's it, and I'll get a trailer, I'll get a bigger motor for my boat. And
you're right. You're absolutely right. There's always something else that we can latch onto to just forget about, things that we've done, or you just forget about stuff that we don't want to deal with right now.
And of course, the most common solution in our society is reach for a bottle of alcohol and just anesthetize yourself and turn on the boob tube. And
that's right. Just not deal with anything that you don't want to deal with. So
yell at the TV and drink beer.
Yeah, I mean that's a very common thing that many people do every day.
When I was a college professor, I would go out with my friends on Friday or Saturday night, and my male friends, and we'd go to bars and we'd talk about what jerks everybody was.
Yeah, that sounds like people I knew growing up as well. So, I mean, speaking from the point at which that you're lying there on the floor, I mean, did you get any impression that, there were worse, darker places beyond which you were currently?
Oh, I was very aware that where they wanted to take me was going to be much worse than what I'd already experienced.
Okay, so I mean, so you're after reciting, what you could remember of, anything religious to scare these creatures off. I mean, you've had some time to, look inside and take a look at yourself. So at what point did you finally decide to ask, Jesus, for help? I mean, a memory came to me. It wasn't something that I willingly conjured up, but my subconscious willingly conjured up, of myself as a child sitting in a Sunday school classroom singing Jesus Loves Me. But more than the setting or the words was, I also had the memory of being a child and believing that there was a person much more powerful and very, very good who cared about me than Jesus. Now, when I was a little boy, I used to pray to him, and I used to believe that he was watching over me, and when I was scared, I would, pray to him and ask him for help. And it was my only hope in this situation. It was the only thing that came to my mind that offered any hope at all, because the alternative was to be in this darkness forever and ever with these horrible people, and to go deeper and further into their world of misery. So with that, I called out, Jesus, please save me. And a minuscule little speck of light came into the darkness and very rapidly got bigger and bigger, and it came over me, and hands and arms emerged out of this brilliant white light and reached down underneath me and touched me. And when he touched me, I became completely whole again. And as he was picking me up,
I felt a sense of love that I had never known before in my life, of just an overwhelming sense of love and acceptance. And he picked me up and held me up against him like a father would do with his child, or a mother would do with her child. Just held me very close and hugged me, and I cried in his arms.
Did Jesus look like you know how I guess we all picture him from I guess artist interpretations, long hair and beard, and I mean, is that what he looked like?
I don't know, because the light was so powerfully bright that I couldn't see beyond the brightness of the light. All I could do was feel him, and he felt very human.
Okay. So you mentioned that, and again, I'm referencing that article. You mentioned that Jesus called out to a group of angels in musical.
Well, first he took me out of that place. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
sorry.
We left there.
Oh yeah, that's right. You were going through a tunnel.
No, not a tunnel. We were just flying through space, and we were moving towards a world of light, away from the world of darkness.
Okay.
And I had a really bad feeling, and I thought to myself, he's made a terrible mistake. I'm garbage. I don't belong here. And with that, we stopped moving towards the world of light, which I came later to understand that was heaven and where God was, the world of light. But we hadn't arrived in it yet. And that's when we began to converse with him, knowing everything that I thought. We didn't ever exchange any audible words. He just knew what I thought, and then he would put his thoughts into my head.
So could you both communicate, I guess, telepathically?
Yes.
Okay.
Which was very disconcerting at first, because when I realized that he knew everything I was thinking, I was like, how am I going to censor my thinking? And then I thought something that I didn't want him to know that I was thinking, and he laughed. He thought that was very funny.
Sorry,
So
Ryan.
Jesus definitely has a sense of humor. Then you're saying
Huge sense of humor.
May I ask?
Refreshing.
May I ask what you were thinking about?
Breasts. Women's breasts.
How could
I thought,
you? How
what
could
if
you
I
resist?
what if I think about something that I want him to think about, like women's breasts, and all of a sudden he started laughing. I realized he got it. Fortunately, it could have been worse.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, certainly.
So what this in-between area, in between the world of light and the world of darkness where you were, how would you describe the in-between area? Like space?
Yeah, just space. But there's a lot of coming and going in that space. I saw a lot of movement of what I just thought were lights, but I later realized those were souls, angels, people. There was a lot of activity going on, but at first I didn't know what it was. It was just like light shooting this way and that way.
That's interesting. So, I mean, is it well? Usually, like when I think of heaven, it's really hard. It's a hard concept to grasp. Like you think spiritually, and you almost think it's it's completely different from the physical realm. But I mean, speaking in terms of space and stuff like that, I mean, it almost sounds like it exists in a physical space. I mean, perhaps as we mentioned earlier on a different vibrational frequency. But it certainly seems like a physical, it's there, kind of a place.
It is, but it has a different physics. So, like for example, the people in heaven can move through time and space at will without any effort.
Okay.
Which is pretty interesting, because to them in heaven, everything can be now. There's no past, there's no future. It's just all now. So, it's kind of an interesting world, because one of the artifices of our world is the whole idea of finiteness.
Yeah.
So we have we define space as a succession of points or locations, and we define time as a succession of intervals. But in heaven, those rules are not applicable. So it's quite different.
It must be a lot to take in, actually, just, being there and, having all this, brought, I guess taking it in, just taking in and existing, knowing these things. Now, did you ask Jesus any questions while you were there?
Yeah. At first, he brought some angels around us, and they showed me my life, which was a disaster because it was not something that they enjoyed looking at, and I certainly didn't enjoy the sadness that I created with them and what became of my life, which was basically, I didn't break laws. I didn't go to prison. I wasn't arrested or anything, but I was selfish and manipulative.
So,
and when we got done with that, which I was very happy to be done with, he invited me to ask questions, so I asked him everything I could think of to ask him, and he answered everything very kindly and patiently.
So, is there any questions that you asked him that like, I won't ask you to mention anything like personal, but is there anything that you asked him, that people would be interested to know? I guess, like, the meaning of life and that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, but let me start off with something like this. Was in 1985.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up, the biggest concern of myself and most of the people I knew was the threat of a total nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union, which would result in the end of life on the planet.
Okay.
And there was even movies made on that basis. Probably the one that I remember the most was On the Beach, from a novel by Neville Shute, which showed the last few survivors in southern Australia just as they were getting sick from radiation sickness, and they were the last people alive. A very depressing movie.
Oh,
anyways, all my life, I grew up with the understanding that the whole world could come to an end in a nuclear exchange for absolutely no good reason, and that there were many people that believed that it was highly probable. There was a group of scientists, actually, that still do it today, that keep the atomic clock, and at one time it was like 1 minute to midnight, the end of the world, that sort of thing. So anyway, so it was a huge preoccupation. So I asked Jesus, I said, what about people destroying the world with nuclear weapons? And he said, oh, God's not going to let that happen.
Like, well, that's a relief.
Oh, well, that's good. That's a good thing. Would God, stop it from happening if people tried to make it happen? He said, absolutely. He said, it's not our world, it's not the humans' world to destroy it. It belongs to God. He's not going to let people destroy it. God loves the world and loves all the things in it. He made it. It's his creation. He's not going to let people destroy it. And God will do whatever it takes to keep people from doing that. And I said, so there's not going to be a nuclear war? And he said, there is not going to be a nuclear war.
Wow, that's
nice to know. That was in 85. So then I asked him about the Cold War. And I said, well, how long is the Cold War going to go on? Because at that time, I believed, and I think everybody believed in 1985, that the Cold War was going to go on for hundreds and hundreds of more years, between capitalism and communism. And he said, oh, the Cold War is going to be over in a few years. I said, oh, really? How's that going to happen? He said, peacefully. And he said, I don't believe it. It's like, how could that end? He said, the Soviet Union is going to collapse. The people are about done with it, and the East Bloc countries, they're just going to give up on communism, and it's just going to be defeated. I said, well, that's incredible.
Yeah, that.
And of course, after my experience, when I told people stuff like that, they just thought I was nuts.
I wonder what they thought after it actually happened.
Well, then they thought, well, yeah, we knew that. We know, and they would just dismiss it.
Yeah, that seems about right. So I mean, did you ask them, what the meaning to life was, or?
Without, like I had said earlier, we were God created this world so that we could have this life experience, and the purpose of our life is to know God and to love one another, and that if we do that, then we get to move on and become more spiritually evolved beings.
So another thing I kind of want to go back to is that so when you were traveling through space and when you when you guys stopped, before you reached heaven, when you had that that thought, so Jesus, he called out to those angels in musical tones, which I being a musician, I can't help but wonder, what exactly, like, I mean, could you describe it? What was it, like pure tones? Was it like did it sound like
pure tone? And as a consequence of that, I love things that make pure tones. Like I have a small collection of very good wind chimes.
Oh, okay.
Because they remind me of those tones.
That's really interesting. Now the angels. So there was a group of angels that, of course, played your life story back to you. Now, were those angels, I guess, assigned to you specifically? Like,
yes.
Okay, so do everybody have like a group of angels? And if so,
yes.
So what about guardian angels? I mean, is that something that also, like, do people have guardian angels?
Yes.
Wow. That is really, really cool. Yeah, interesting. So, at what point, I mean, you have these these questions with Jesus and stuff like that. I mean, how did you go from that to, I mean, coming back? Did you have a choice that you wanted to come back to Earth, or, was it like you were told it wasn't your time?
Well, when I exhausted all of my questions, I said I want to go to heaven, because I'd asked him a lot about heaven, and he told me and showed me about heaven and things. We never went to heaven, but he showed me about heaven things and told me about it. And of course, it would be, the obvious choice. You'd want to go to heaven, and I said I want to go to heaven now. And he said, no, you have to go back to the world. And so we had a huge argument, and I argued as forceful as I possibly could for me going to heaven, and he countered my arguments very patiently and kindly and rationally with why that wasn't going to happen and why I had to come back to this world.
So, was his reason, it wasn't your time, or perhaps, I actually often wonder if, you coming back and relaying that story wasn't, a part of, a grander plan.
Yeah, he never actually said that, but I have come to the conclusion that one of the reasons why I had this experience was so that I would have an opportunity to speak about it and have an opportunity to counter the lies that people tell about life and about who we are and what our relationship with God is. There's so much mischief and lying going on in this world about what it's just not true, that this people are confused and they don't know who they are and they don't know why they're here, and it's really all very, very simple. And it's what sort of the kernel of truth in the world's major religions have been trying to tell people for thousands of years.
So another thing I wanted to ask too, when you were watching your life story, and you said that the angels and Jesus, like you could feel that they hurt by certain actions that you had, I guess, done throughout your life. I mean, do you know what the connection was? Like, why it hurt them? I guess, like, what was the connection? What was it that made them, uh, take it personally? I guess.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about my experience is that I was very dramatically exposed to the idea that Jesus, the angels, and God all have feelings, and that they respond to what we do with pleasure and joy, or sadness and frustration. And I didn't know that. So one of the things that I try and do in my life is to not give God too much grief, and to on occasion do things that I think would be pleasing to God by being a good person.
Yes.
Now, if we could, I'd like to kind of circle back a little bit. Now, you said that you were shown heaven and the different aspects of heaven. Could you kind of paint us a picture of the structure? Like what? I guess everyone has this image of white fluffy clouds, lights, and choir, and not really much else happening.
Yeah, it's really quite a very poor picture of heaven. That's the one that I was given too, and it's not like that at all. First of all, in heaven, everything that ever was, is, and ever will be, that's good, is in heaven. So all good things are in heaven. So it's vast beyond anyone's ability to imagine how vast it is. And there's many, many levels to heaven. And when we go from our earthly existence to heaven, we start off as our orientation in levels of heaven that seem much like earth. And the purpose of that is for our comfort. See, one of the things that people don't understand about God is God has nothing to prove to us. Since God is, God doesn't have to prove anything at all. So everything that he does out of consideration for us, not out of his need to prove, because he's quite secure in who God is. So when we go to heaven, since it's a totally different physical universe than ours, we start off in a world that seems much like the world that we know.
So we can kind of acclimatize.
Yeah, and as we become more at ease and more comfortable and more knowledgeable about heaven, then we move on to more and more advanced levels.
So, what are your thoughts on intent? Like, what I mean is, like for me, for example, growing up, I've always had, even though it doesn't come across in these interviews because I try to be as serious as possible, but I've always had a kind of a jokey sense of humor, and a quick wit. So, I mean, I've joked with, lots of times, like I got quick little things that I'd say to people, and and sometimes at their expense, but never really thinking much of it. Like if someone jokes at me, like I don't really take it too personally. And as I've gotten older, I realized that some of these things probably have hurt people. And I'm just wondering, like at the end here, when you're going over your events, you're being reviewed. Does intent play a part on your actions? Like if you had done something, for example, that from your perspective and point of view, you certainly didn't try to hurt somebody, but it did.
Right.
Is that different from someone who like purposely went out of their way to hurt somebody?
Absolutely. Yeah, the interesting thing is it's interesting that you bring that up, because it was made clear to me that intention is huge in God's eye.
Okay.
For example, I mean, I use a sort of opposite example. You're driving your car and you hit black ice. You know, you didn't see it, but the road is covered with, you know, just a sheet of ice. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know if you call it. We call it black ice because you know it's invisible.
Yeah.
And you smash into another car and you hurt somebody. Well, I mean, you had no intention of doing that. It was just circumstances. You know, you might have even been driving very carefully. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, God understands that. You know that there are circumstances in this world. You know, I'm trying to be more ecologically minded. You know, we sort our trash and we fill our recycle bins and put it up. But, you know, as an American, I'm consuming huge amounts of the world's resources while other people have very little. And I'm painfully aware of that, but what can I mean, it's hard to live without creating waste in our society. I mean, you can't even buy anything that's not packaged, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean,
So,
we find ourselves in these situations. Just like, for example, I mean, you could look at, you know, someone not necessarily well off. I mean, a lot of people are middle class and, you know, struggling to make your bills, kind of a thing. And you know, but there are people in the world that are, you know, have nothing. You know, but at the same time, you're not really in a position to, you know, give what you have away. Like you're kind of treading water your own self, right? So I mean,
right.
it's a gray area to me. Like, you know, what's morally right and wrong in that situation. You know, we have a lot of gray areas. I think that just complicates, you know, our thinking. You know, for what's right and wrong. You know, and something else that I you know, there was a quote that I came across that I found very interesting. You know, and what it was essentially is that you said, you know, God sees the church as one church, and that all divisions are man-made. Now, now by that, do you mean that, like, you know, I mean, there's many religions, but you know, are we talking that as long as, like, you know, people believe in something, like, you know, maybe everybody is kind of believing in the same God and they don't realize it, kind of a thing?
Yeah, well, when I was speaking of one church, I was referring to the Christian church and not all world religions.
Okay,
Because,
so like,
there are some there's some good religions besides Christianity, and of course Judaism would be an obvious example. But as Mother Teresa said when she was asked about all the religions in India, and I'm going to quote her, she said, "I love all religions, but I love my own the best." Well, that's how I feel about Christianity. But there are some religions that are just horrible. I mean, like militant Islam, for example, has very little to commend it. You know.
okay, and so, well, I mean, in Christianity, well, I guess that's the main one that we all have anyway, like Catholic and stuff like that. Now, what do you think? Like, now this is something that, you know, I've often struggled with, I guess. You know, thinking about. I mean, I know where I'm to. I know, you know, what I believe in and stuff like that. But I often wonder. You know, I mean, people who, for example, I don't know, say they are, I don't know, Buddhist. You know, just picking a name out of a hat, but they're really good people. In general, you know, they live to help people and stuff like that. I mean, what happens, you know, I mean, what do you think happens to these kinds of people once they cross over?
Well, God knows what's in their heart, and God is a loving, just, and merciful God, so I'm not worried about their fate at all. I'm more concerned I'm more concerned with people that call themselves Christians who are not loving people and think that because they call themselves Christians that they're going to go to heaven when in fact they're doing everything wrong.
Yeah, and that's something, again, I've noticed myself, and it doesn't help religion at all to have this stuck up kind of these people who are stuck up looking down their nose at other people, because I thought the whole point was, judge not lest ye be judged.
Right.
Right. And
that's right.
And intent, again, coming back to intent, I would imagine intent is everything. So, generally, I'd like to believe that if, people, they try to be good people. I truly believe that hardwired in most of us is a moral compass. Like similarly to say, I don't need a weather vane to know which way the wind blows. I know, that it's wrong to hurt people, kind of a thing. So I think that generally people have that. So if people, generally try to live a good life, they should feel pretty good no matter what they believe in, that they'll have their chance when they die to be rewarded, we'll say.
Yes, but the problem is that human beings are the absolute great masters of self-deception. So if you go to, for example, a prison, you'll find out that they're all good people and none of them ever did anything wrong, and they've been all unjustly imprisoned.
Yeah.
One of the big problems with, for example, child molesters is they don't admit that they've done anything wrong.
Yeah.
They're the victim because they have a disease.
Right. It's
but really, they know
we are such great masters of self-deception.
Yeah, when really, they still know it's wrong. So, whether or not they feel a certain way, they should show restraint. They still know it causes harm, and great, psychological harm to the people or their victims.
Yeah.
So, they so again, we get back to, we are the masters of our own domain. We have the free will to choose on what we want to act on.
Well, with that said, I think that people definitely be interested in one particular question that I've read that you asked about life throughout the universe. Could you spend some time elaborating on that? Because personally I find that very very exciting and interesting, and I'd like to hear what you were shown on that topic, or what you know about that.
Sure, I'd be happy to, but I want to preface it with, for some reason, for some people this makes some people very angry, and I've gotten some very angry emails and letters and things from people who denounced me for saying this. But what I want to tell you is that this is not my opinion. This is what Jesus told me, and if people don't want to hear it, then it's their problem, because this is what I believe is the truth, because I'm only reporting what I was told, and that is that the universe is full of life, and that I asked Jesus if where we ranked in the world of life, and he said at the bottom in terms of our spiritual development. And I said, well, what do you mean we're like kindergarten? And he said, no, lower than that. And I said, lower than kindergarten would be like nursery school or daycare. He said, yeah, that's where the earth ranks in terms of spiritual development. So I said, well, what are the higher levels like? And he said, well, in the higher levels, there's no war, there's no poverty, there's no hunger. People live in total harmony, not only with each other, but with the environment that they live in. And people live to love one another and pursue the arts and knowledge and have a tremendous interest in everyone else's well-being. Like, oh, that sounds awfully good. And this world could be like that if we chose to be that way. I mean, there's no reason why the world has to be the way it is. It's just people like the world the way it is. We get exactly what we want, and everybody's getting what they want.
So, what are your thoughts? I have to ask this just because. What are your thoughts on people's pets when they pass? Like, if you had a dog that you loved, or a cat that you loved, or something like that. I mean,
I'm sorry you asked that question, because I didn't ask it, and I don't know the answer. And the problem is, right now, my wife and I have 3 dogs and a cat. We are pretty serious animal lovers. Some people might think we're a little crazy about our pets, and I've had dogs and cats all my life, and I don't know what's going to happen. I hope that they're all in heaven, but the problem is, if they're all there, it's going to be a mob. There's been a lot of dogs and cats in my life. I don't know what I'm going to do, because it'll be like being run over by a herd of pets. Well, I don't know the answer to that. Some people have said that they've seen their pets in heaven, so I hope that's true.
I hope it's true too. You know, like you, I've always had pets growing up, and I really, really hope, you know, wherever I end up, that, you know, I get to see my pets again, you know, along with my family and friends too. But I consider my pets family, you know, like,
yeah.
You know, we even have a little cat with asthma, and I give him medicine every day. So,
Yep.
You know, I mean, we're pretty crazy with our pets over this way too.
Yeah.
So were you shown, you know, any indication that there are humans on other worlds at other levels of enlightenment, or were the beings that you were shown all different species? And if so, would any of those be any that we would recognize from popular culture?
Well, I asked Jesus, what do intelligent beings in other worlds look like? And so he paraded images of beings from other worlds in front of me. And when the parade began, they looked like humans. And as the parade went on, there started to be subtle differences, you know, like in ears and noses and eyes and things. And then as the parade went on, they started to get weirder. And when they started looking more like undersea creatures than humans, I said, okay, that's enough, but I want to see more. Looking back now, there's a scene in the first Star Wars movie of the cantina scene early in the first Star Wars movie.
Oh yeah, the guys playing instruments, and the bar scene.
Yeah, those were the good-looking people I saw, but they started getting much weirder than that.
What was there anything that resembled like what we would refer to as an alien?
Oh yeah.
Cool. Well, I guess there's your answer for everyone who ever wondered. So, Howard, I mean, your story stuck with me, you know, and I keep reiterating this. I mean, it stuck with me for years. And, you know, the overall message for me has brought hope. And, of course, you know, yesterday when I got to speak with you on the phone and about my past transgressions regarding, like, the occult, and, you know, I got your opinion and thoughts, you know, which gave me a great comfort. And I know there are many others out there that have also gotten into things that they regret, and, you know, and may worry, you know, what those, you know, actions may bring. And I was just wondering if you could, you know, say something that, you know, might help those people, like give them some comfort who might be listening to this podcast.
God wants us to come home. Heaven is home, It's where we belong. It's where we're loved. It's where we're known. And God is going to forgive anything that we do, and God is going to do everything in a loving and gentle and non-coercive way to convince us to turn our lives around and to want to come home and to be with God. So, one of the things that I find in people, that so many people think they have committed the unpardonable sin, the unforgivable sin, and they have not. God wants them home. And Jesus, in his teachings, made many illustrations of this, like, for example, the shepherd who leaves the flock and goes out searching for the sheep that's gone astray, and also the parable of the prodigal son. I mean, God's after us, because God loves us more than our parents love us. God loves us more than our grandparents love us, and there's nothing God wants other than us to want to be with God forever.
And just to clarify it for other people, like, and I refer to the occult in particular because, as you know, a lot of these cults have traps. Like once you, make you believe that once you've signed on or once you're in there, you're stuck. There's no going back. But this, what you're saying now applies to that too. So anybody out there, if you're worried that, you're trapped in this hopeless situation or that there's no coming back, you can come back. That's what we're talking about here. And I just kind of want to reinforce the idea, as coming from Howard. And I mean, if you Google his name, Howard Storm on the internet, I mean, he's been on countless, TV shows and radio shows. He's one of the most famous near-death experiences, and of course he completely changed his life when he came back, and that's not something that somebody does if they don't truly believe in their experience. So
well, in that vein, Howard, did you by happenstance ask any questions specifically related to hell or demons or the devil specifically? Like, were you given any information on that?
I didn't ask anything on that topic because at that point I knew all I wanted to know about it. I knew more than I wanted to know about it because I had experienced it. And since my experience, they've been after me a few times. So we've had some encounters. They've tried to kill me a few times and things.
Wow.
And the good news is that Jesus is a lot more powerful than they are, so I have to live a life in my hope and faith and trust in him.
So would you say that demonic possession is a real thing that does occur?
Oh, absolutely.
So, and this is something that I wonder about too. Just talking about certain things like this, and of course you would know because, you share your story and stuff like that. Do you believe that just by making these things known, that you become targets, for negative entities?
Yes.
And so in this case, anybody who, because I mean, you kind of want to, I mean, it does help people to know stories like such as yours. So I mean, it's something that you want to get out there. So for people who do these kinds of things and want to make it known, would you say that like just prayer and stuff like that it would keep you safe?
When you have when you put your life in the hands of God, God's angels are going to literally be a wall to protect you. And so, although some scary things can happen, they just can't get through the wall.
Well, that's comforting. I often wonder, just us running this podcast, like,
Yeah.
but
Well, you're making somebody mad doing this stuff.
I know, and that's these are things that cross my mind, and people tell me not to, that I'm silly or not to think about it. But honestly, just last week, I mentioned some of these things, touching on religion, I guess. And just by doing that, I had a number of things happen that week, and our demonic episode shot up through the roof. It's just really weird stuff, and I guess this is part of what got me back on topic with this again.
Well, Howard, would you care to elaborate at all on what you mean by you had some encounters with these negative beings afterwards? Like, what kind of encounters? And was it a visible thing or?
Oh yeah, I'll give you a couple examples. One night, probably 11 o'clock at night. No problems with the weather. I was driving on a interstate highway between Dayton and Cincinnati, and there was no traffic on the road. I mean, there was nobody in, this is a 6-lane interstate highway. Nobody on my side of the highway, just a few cars on the other side of the highway. And I'm driving along, feeling fine, everything's good. And all of a sudden the car comes, I see the headlamps in my rearview mirror coming at a very rapid speed. It pulls up alongside of me and tries to run me off the road.
Wow.
So I'm like, oh, this is really creepy. So I slow way down to, I'm on the interstate. I was going 70. Now I slow down to 50, 30, 20, 10, and he slows down alongside of me, constantly cutting me off, trying to drive me off the road. So finally, I'm going 2 miles an hour. So I'm kind of afraid to stop, because I'm afraid if I stop, he's going to get out of his car and come after me or something. So I don't want to come to a dead stop. So I'm just creeping along. And after a few more attempts at getting me to go off the road, he takes off and goes. And it's like, boy, that was really weird. And there was nobody else on our side of the highway at all.
Wow.
Another time I was driving into coming off the interstate, driving into Cincinnati, and a red pickup truck. This is in downtown, in the city downtown. A red pickup truck on about 50 miles an hour tried to T-bone me. I was going through a green light, he had a red light, and he tried to T-bone me. And if he hit me, it surely would have killed me. But just as I was going into the intersection, I heard an audible voice tell me to stop, and I just hit the brakes. And we passed within inches of each other, and out of the red pickup truck came this huge laughter as he went zooming by me.
So that voice you heard was probably your guardian angel right there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure.
I always find this stuff, because I believe it, and it spooks me to think that, just by, being a part of this kind of a thing, or, telling people, what you believe could be helpful information or anything like that, and just by doing that, you could be at risk, and it's uneasy.
Yeah. I do mission work with Maya Indians in Belize, Central America. And, the devil's always trying to mess with our work. Like, for example, one of my friends down there told me that the word was going around the village that the way that people get help is the women sleep with me.
Oh, okay.
We've helped a lot of families. So I've slept with all those women, and they said, well, that's what they're telling people. And I'm going gee, I'm quite a stud. I was impressed. Because the truth is, I haven't had any sexual relations with any of the women down there. And I'm actually quite careful about, how I treat the women and men and children. I'm a pastor. I'm kind of self-aware of how I come on, and I try not to appear, I don't want to appear to be lecherous or suggestive in any way. But that's another way of killing you, is trying to destroy the work that we're doing in the village by spreading rumors.
So, well, have you ever had any experiences the other way? I guess, like, since you obviously you returned back, to your body, and you went through quite a lengthy recovery. But after coming back, did you ever have any experience with Jesus or the angels, or visibly? I guess
hundreds of them, hundreds.
That's
why after I came back, one of the thoughts in my head, not a dominant thought, but one of the thoughts in my head was like, what if it didn't really happen? I could just go back to my life, and just have my life, instead of having to change everything. Because it's very difficult to change everything. When you're 38 years old, you worked all your life to get to a certain position, and now you got to give it all up and start all over again, which is what I did. And, it's been a struggle.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you made massive, changes. And to me, I think that speaks for the credibility, of the story. I mean, I take everything at face value and open my mind anyway. But, when somebody makes such drastic changes to their own life, I mean, that, this, I mean, to them, definitely happened. I mean, that's a lot of changes to make. You don't do that unless you don't believe in your experience. And I think that should give it a lot of weight to anybody, because I know that the more incredible a story is, it seems the harder it is for people to buy into it. But, I think that should lend a lot of weight to that for anybody who's on the fence, Well,
but people, people can make up stuff because they don't want to believe. Like, people tell me, well, I'm just in it for the money. And I'm like, okay, if that's true, where's the money? Because I don't have it.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't, like, the small amount of money that I've made from the book has all gone into the mission work, plus a whole lot more. So, I mean, it's like, I'm not living the life of a purely wealthy person. Just to, I never made much money as a pastor. I don't know. It's funny. People just assume the worst motivation for you, whether they know anything about you or not.
Yeah. How did your family react to your experience? I'm guessing that you'd be pretty emphatic about telling the story after.
I was terrible. I became a religious zealot for a while, and I so completely turned them off that they've all have been turned off to me, and I deeply, deeply regret it. I think being a religious fanatic is a huge mistake, but unfortunately, I went through that phase, and.
Well, I don't think you could really be blamed for the intensity of your experience. You'd want to try and hold on to that, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not so fanatical anymore. I try to be a lot more easy going about it all.
So what are your thoughts on, like, people who say, like, the devil owns the physical world, like the possessions and that kind of a thing, and we hear stories about, like, celebrities and stuff like that who have made pacts with the devil, and of course they get unusual amounts of wealth and fame, and I mean, do you think there's any validity to that? Like,
I do, because the devil came to me one day. This was during the daytime. I was conscious and awake. I was sitting in a chair reading, and he came to me and he said he would give me anything I wanted. I mean, he appeared physically in the room in front of me. He was talking to me, and I didn't know who it was at first, but he made me this offer, and I was really excited because it was like, well, I could tell my story and be rich and powerful and influential. I'll be another Billy Graham. I'll be, the biggest, you know, influence on the world. I mean, he said I could have it all. And I had been early in the day reading the Bible, and it said to always test the spirits in the name of Jesus Christ. So I said, in the name of Jesus Christ, if you're from God, stay. But if in the name of Jesus Christ, if you're not from God, I want you to leave. And he roared at me.
Wow.
And then he exploded into little atoms and sort of dissipated into the room.
That is very...
When he roared at me, he knocked me and my chair back into the wall.
Wow.
Physically. And
that must have been terrifying.
It was extremely terrifying. When he left, I suddenly felt very cold, and I realized why I was cold. I was soaking wet. I hadn't been wet before, but now I was soaking wet, and I realized the reason why I was wet is I had perspired massively in like just a few seconds out of fear.
Wow. So, I mean, did he take on a physical form of?
Oh yeah, he looked like an old-fashioned preacher. He was dressed all in black. He was tall, kind of. He was not real good-looking, but he was a very striking, handsome person.
Okay.
To the top of his hat almost touched the ceiling, which would have made him like 7 feet tall.
Wow. So I mean, he almost appeared, if it was, as a preacher, I mean, he must have, very deceivingly tried to trick you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's
the game.
Yeah.
That's the game.
Well, I gotta say, I mean, there's some really interesting tidbits here that I never knew before. So did you have any other, traumatic experiences with I guess being attacked by negative entities or?
Oh yeah, but I'd rather talk about the good stuff. This stuff is.
I guess it's probably.
So I mean, obviously, you make mention of these 2 attempts that were made on your life, and it would appear that these were, perhaps human agents of the darkness, I guess is a way to put it. Now, at the same time, I guess would it be safe to say that there are human agents of the light, people who are, given a divine directive or a special mission, and they work specifically for that.
Yes, very much so, and I'd like to think that there have been times when I've had an opportunity to do that. One time, when I was still at the university after this experience, I was a department head, and I had a secretary in the office, and my calendar was booked all day long. I had an appointment every hour, which was not unusual. And a student came in, not very early in the morning, and told me that another student of mine, a man who had been a student of mine, was in the hospital dying, and that would be really good if I went and saw him. And I said, well, I'd love to, but I can't. I'm booked. I can't go to the hospital. And he said, well, we don't know how long he's going to make it. So I said, well, maybe tomorrow or the next day I'll try. And shortly after that, my secretary came in and said, well, your 9 o'clock appointment canceled. They can't make it. And then a little while later, she came and she said, your 10 o'clock appointment just called. They canceled. They can't make it. And then the 11 o'clock came in and canceled. And so I was like, that is so weird. I mean, 3 appointments in a row all cancel out. And I think maybe this time was free, so I could leave here and go to the hospital. I mean, and also I felt guilty about leaving my job, my paid job as a department head, and going off and making a hospital visit. But I thought, well, I'm going to go to the hospital. So I went to the hospital, and I was not a pastor. I was just a lay person, and he was in surgical ICU, and the nurse said that no visitors were allowed. And she said, there's no point in seeing him anyway. She said, matter of fact, the doctor is down the hall with the family because he's dying, and he's not conscious, and so there's no reason for you to go into the room because he's not going to last more than a few more minutes. And I said to the nurse, I really, really need to go in and see him. I can't leave this hospital without seeing him. Please let me go see him. I promise I won't be long, and I won't touch anything. I won't disturb anything. I just want to pray. And she said, okay, but just a couple minutes. So I went into the room. His name was Craig, and I started praying, and he opened his eyes. He had he was intubated, so he couldn't talk to me, but he was trying to talk to me, and I was praying that if he wanted to live, he just needed to ask Jesus, and that he could live, and that his wife loved him, and he shouldn't leave her because she really needed him. Da, 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 da. Anyways, I prayed over him, and then he was awake and conscious while I was praying, and so I left the room and went down the hall to see his wife and mother in the waiting area, and they were crying. The doctor just left them, and the doctor told them it was over. And I went in the room and I said, I know the doctor knows what he's doing, but Craig's going to get well. He's doing fine. He's awake. He's conscious, and he's going to get all better. And they looked at me and they said, are you crazy? And I said, well, it's the state possibility, but I just know he's going to get better. So the wife left the room and went down to the surgical intensive care unit, and the doctor was in the room with Craig, and they were pulling the intubation tube out of his throat because he wanted to breathe. And he, in fact, got better.
Wow.
And I want to be clear. I didn't heal him. All I did was pray with him. But he was very close to death, and he needed some hope, and he needed some prayer, and he needed somebody to talk about Jesus. And when I did that, God pulled him out of it.
Yeah.
So, sometimes you can be used by God to be the right person at the right place at the right time.
So, using that analogy that, you can be an instrument, of God, and just like, we talked before of, the takes that the evil entities took on your life, which, at this point we're saying are human entities that take on that role. But do you believe that, it's a, in those cases, it could be like a human body, but inside of it is almost like, a demon is controlling it, or it's it's a masked or costume per se of a demonic entity?
Yeah, people can open themselves up to demonic spirits through anger, through the sense of desire for revenge, through traumas that they've experienced, that they are suffering from those traumatic experiences, and those provide openings for demonic spirits to take control of their lives. So they're still people, but they're under
it's not themselves.
Influences.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, we're coming up here, I guess, on the end of the show. But I mean, is there anything that you'd like to share, Howard? Like, for all of our listeners, is there anything that you'd like, to tell them personally?
No matter what your circumstances are, no matter what's happened to you, the reason why you exist is because there's a creator who made you, and he made you to, he wants you to have a good life, a happy life. He wants you to have a life of hope and faith and joy. And it's yours for the taking. And there's no need to suffer the things that so many people are suffering with if you choose the alternative. And you're not alone in this, because there's thousands of churches out there, some better than others, but full of lots of good people who would like to help you have a better life and have a happy life and a good life, and most importantly, to go through this life into the next life and experience even better things than anything you could possibly have ever experienced in this world. And it's all there for the taking, and it's just so sad that people don't take advantage of the offer of God to be with Him forever in this world and in the next.
Well, Howard, my sincerest thanks for coming on to our show and sharing all that information. Like I said before, I mean it's interesting anyway, but I think there's a very important message. That I hope resonates with everyone who's listening to this podcast. And, thanks again for coming on the show. For everybody else, thanks for listening. And remember, if you have any paranormal stories, pictures, videos, or what have you, please submit them to will@effedupstories.com.
Or Ryan at effedupstories.com.
For a chance to get it on our website and or a podcast. And be sure to also check out our official site at www.effedupstories.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel, add us on Facebook and Twitter, and just generally spread it on blogs and websites, because the more people that tune in, of course, the more content gets sent to us to make shows for you to listen to. So with that said, thanks again, Howard, for coming on the show. Thank you for everyone listening, and that's me, Will Pender, signing off.
Good night, everybody. Thank you, Howard.
Thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun.